Evening, everyone. Good to see some smiling faces out there. We're just going to give it a few minutes for people to sign in. Hope everybody's doing well. Everybody's going to, I think, be muted for now, but once we get into our small groups, we'll undo that. Welcome, welcome. We had about 50 registered, so we're just going to give it a few more minutes here. We're right at 6. Hopefully everybody can hear me. For those of you who were here before, Hannah, wave Hannah. Hannah is our magician behind the scenes. She makes this all happen and gets us into the right breakout rooms. So, and she will also be available if anybody needs to chat, if you know how to do that. So again, we're just going to give it another minute or two here.
Oh, it looks like someone has a question. Go ahead, Roger. Should be able to unmute yourself. There you
go. Okay. Dwight, are you familiar with the online class on racism and slavery being sponsored by Quest?
No, I'm not. Wait, tell us a little bit more.
If you Googled, I think it's Quest Lancaster, this is, there's a series of different workshops being offered. This used to be offered in person to people in nursing homes or people over the age of 60 or so. It's now open to any age, and it's online, and it's Thursday morning is the one on racism. It starts at 11 and it runs until noon, so it's 1 hour, but you need to register ahead of time. So you should, if you're interested, you should Google Quest Lancaster, and that'll tell you how to register and a little bit about the class. They had the first session last Thursday, so tomorrow would be the second one. It's 6 weeks long, and I thought it was very good, but it kind of goes along with what we're doing in this group. Excellent.
Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, I'll unmute myself now if I can figure out how to do that.
Well, as we're still waiting for a few more to join, just a reminder, if you saw the email blast, that we are going to do a large group presentation on October 21st at 6 p.m. And that's going to be on looking. So for those of you who have been kind of following along, we had, I think, 6 seminars now that have looked at the history of slavery and discrimination, and we've done it chronologically. We started back with the transatlantic slave trade, went through the arrival of enslaved Africans in 1619, and then went the whole way through the present. And now we're going to start focusing on different topics and subjects. And because we have an election coming up in November, it seemed like a really good time to look at the history of how our country has disenfranchised Black voters, particularly since the Civil War. If you recall, during Reconstruction, there were 3 amendments passed, the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. And the 15th Amendment granted, prohibited states from discriminating against Black men in being able to vote. It didn't guarantee them the right to vote, but we're going to take a closer look at that. And so be sure to get that on your calendar and register. I think we'll go ahead and get started. There may be a few more that joined, but Reverend Bailey, do you want to start with a prayer?
Sure. Let us pray. Gracious God, Father of all creation, we thank and praise you for this day. We thank and praise you for this action and this activity we're going to be a part of tonight. We just pray that for open hearts, open minds, and that you again will lift us from beyond ourselves to be able to see exactly what you created this world to be. Bless us as one by one, and we will give you the glory. In your name we pray, and for our sakes, amen.
I think many of you know Danielle Brown. She's going to be the facilitator for our small group session tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to Danielle.
All right, thank you, Dwight. I'm going to begin by just sharing my screen to go over a few pieces. This is the purpose of our work, and I want to put this up and just speak to this holistically. We really want to get into the interrogating and the wrestling with the historical information that was shared out so that we can really dig into the work that we need to do. I know in the last few small group conversations, what we struggled with when we were talking about the facilitation is that sometimes because of present circumstances and situations, we can dig into that emotion of the current context and diverge from the actual historical context. Not that we don't want to give value to people's experiences. Speaking to specifically last night's presidential debate, I'm sure was a trigger point for several folks, and we understand that. But the larger piece, that was what we probably would define as a leaf, and the tree and the root is the work we're trying to get into and really talk about our responsibility around this idea of our racist past and racism in our current context and our past context. So it's just so important that we stay to this and focus on this. With that, we do have a few areas we want to make sure. These are our community agreements for our conversations. You know, the questions that we're asking, the questions that we work through are very dense and again, could trigger some emotion. So we're asking that everyone make sure, you know, show up and be present in the conversation, be engaged, pay attention to the heart and to the meaning of what people are saying, pay attention to your own space, tell the truth without blame or judgment, be open to outcomes and not attached to outcomes. Again, we all have our own context in which we bring this, we all have our experiences, but in order to really grow through this work, we have to be open to the outcomes, not attached to them. To begin our discussion, what we're actually going to do is we're going to try to lay some foundation and create some common definitions around the work. And so there's a few questions that I'm going to ask Dwight and Reverend Bailey to speak to and just have a conversation about to set the stage for our smaller group conversations before we get there. So I'm going to pose those questions and I'm going to ask them even though they see them, and then just open up the floor for them to begin to discuss those pieces. So we want to start with really unpacking the idea around racism. So I'm going to ask each of them to share how they're defining it and how we want to use that as our foundation for our learning now.
Reverend Bailey, you want to go first or do you want me to?
Yeah, I think you can go. I'm
Okay.
comfortable either way.
Well, this is, when we talked a little bit about this when we were preparing, one of the things that I've learned from Reverend Bailey that has really been insightful for me, particularly coming from a white middle-class background, is that I have always viewed racism as interpersonal relationships and feelings and trying to get along with people that are different from me and trying to identify maybe more emotions and feelings about stereotypes I've learned. And while there's always bigotry out there and issues regarding how people feel towards people that are different from them, what I've come to appreciate is when we look at racism, it's a much more systemic type issue that's looking at institutions and our history and how that has created a society that advantages white folks in a systemic way and hurts people of color, particularly Black folks. And that when we focus, particularly as white people, when we view racism as, well, we need to focus on how we can have more Black friends, or we need to try and think through if we have racist attitudes, I think we missed the point. Because in some ways that I find has been a kind of an easy thing to fall back and say, hey, I'm not racist because, well, I try not to treat people differently. I try and speak up if I see somebody that's being treated inappropriately, and I have Black friends, so I'm good. And that to me is really missing the bigger point. So when and this has been a process for me to kind of think through this and learn about this, but when I think of racism now, I think of a system that has been built from the bottom up to benefit white people and to hurt Black people. And I'm part of that system. And I get benefits from that even though I didn't maybe choose to be part of that, I am part of it. And so I think as I look at racism, I think of it as a much more broader problem that really requires me to fundamentally think differently about the issue and take it outside of kind of interpersonal relationships and understand it more as a structural problem with our whole society. And what am I going to do as a white person that basically is benefiting from this racist structure? So I'll stop there and let Reverend Bailey add to that.
Yeah, and over the years, and really since we've been working with this situation, my ideas have been evolving and picking up on where other people are thinking has been helping. But basically, what racism in my mind is prejudice that has the power to put the prejudice beliefs and feelings into effect and affect other people, that gives the person with the power the advantage and the privilege. So it's not just I think everybody has some prejudices and biases, but most of us don't have the power to affect large groups of people or numbers of people. And what makes racism so dangerous, it infects and affects so many people, especially by those who have the power to give themselves an advantage because of their prejudices and their biases. So some of my thinking has been changed a little bit along those lines, especially when I try to think of it, since I'm a preacher, thinking of it theologically, where God calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Racism denies that my neighbor is equal to myself and takes advantage of whatever my neighbor has and makes it so that I'm always being privileged or given an advantage over my neighbor. So it makes it so destructive because not everybody, and so it confuses white people sometimes. I hear them say, well, I didn't sign on to that. No, you don't have to sign on to the contract. But the fact that it exists and nobody says anything against the contract and you benefit from it, then you and I both have to do some work to eradicate it. And somebody said it better than me. They said, racism is not the shark, it's the water we swim in. And if you can see it as the water that we swim in, and that we all are affected by it, even those of us who say, well, you know, I didn't do nothing for it, I'm a victim of it. There is no excuse. We all have to work at eradicating this thing called racism, because race is a construct, something that's made up, and white supremacy, the color white is a made up thing as well, because there's no difference between the races. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So as a Christian, I believe God created male and female, that was equal. Both of us are equal, and that the only difference is that happen are those that we choose to see and make as human, but those are not there for us in our creation. So racism is even more destructive to me, because I think it's a sin that destroys relationship and destroys the ability for any society to continue to survive, because you can't survive believing that others are less than you. And historically, we found that out to be, if that makes sense.
So Rev, how would you connect that to defining the lost cause?
Well, part of it, when I see the lost cause, is because what you have to do, you have to build up myths and have to build up historical lies. In order, if something is a construct, you got to be able to see its roots. And there are no roots for the race. So what people have to do is develop roots for it. So you have to you have to tell historical lies in order to support what is an untruth right from the beginning. For example, for the lost cause, they lost, but they changed the reason why they lost, and they changed the people who became the enemies were the winners. The ones who lost, they became the victims, and that their cause was righteous, what they were doing was righteous, and on the right thing, that it wasn't against slavery, or wasn't to keep people slaves, but Africans were still less than white folk. And so they feel they had this grand purpose that was defeated by an ungodly purpose called the North, or the Union soldiers. So, and that's how I would define it.
So White, did you have anything you wanted to add to that definition?
Well, and I guess what I would say is it was a very intentional and widespread approach to, after Reconstruction ended and we entered into the Jim Crow era, to redefine history in a way to allow discrimination to basically influence all of our society, our laws, our systems, our businesses, our schools, everything. And so, unless you understand how systematic this was to rewrite history in order to essentially lay a foundation to continue basically enslaving Black folks after we got through the Civil War, it's not a big surprise that we're still struggling with this stuff today, because you have to look at the historic roots and understand that the loss. So when you hear folks that say, well, the Civil War was about states' rights, I mean, all of us have heard that argument, it's about states' rights. Well, that comes directly from the lost cause. That's the argument, to say it really wasn't about slavery. The folks in the South treated slaves really good. Slaves liked it. This was really about state rights. And so those attitudes arise out of this myth of the lost cause.
Dwight, it also works because of racism. The Northerners also believed that Blacks were less than human.
Yep.
And because they believed that Blacks were less than human, so the argument of white supremacy that comes from the lost cause resonates with the Northern whites, who actually, even though some may have fought in the Civil War against slavery, still believe that Africans' descendants were less than human. So it worked, and that white was still at the top. And so lost cause actually gained power because of that. Because Northerners still believe that there's something great about the Southern lifestyle, where enslaved Africans were on the plantations working for nothing. They're still Northerners, and still looking today to name places in the North with the term plantation and things like that. So they have this here false memory in their mind.
So how does that align with privilege?
Well, once you get, the whole bottom line on this is economics. the bottom line for this whole idea of racism is economic. So those at the top of the, and I'm not talking about those in the middle, I'm talking about those who actually benefit from this racist concept, is the belief, as long as you have people believing that other folk are less than, that they don't deserve anything, you know, should not be paid, but yet you gain profit from what they do, and nobody gets excited that those folk are not getting paid, then you benefit. I like to use the example of when I ride on the highway. I have an easy pass, and so I come to the toll. I just ride right through, and I see these other folk who are standing way online and have to pay the toll, and some have to wait for other people to find money in their pocket and everything else. They're hindered by going through the toll. I am unhindered. That's how privilege works. You just move on through, and as if you've already paid. And here's what I found out why I'm using that. Because sometimes my bank has been, the account that I pay a toll in has been overdrawn, and they still will give me a grace period to ride through, even though my toll is not paid. That's how I see privilege. And those other guys, they don't have that at all. If they don't have the money in their pocket, they're not going through it all. And so that's how I see privilege working. And people benefit from other people's work, and they never pay the price for it.
And unearned advantage, Dwight, do you want to speak to that concept? Rev's talked about it, and you did as well when you were talking about your own context. Did you want to add more?
Well, I mean, I think particularly for white people, we're clueless. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. We're clueless of the advantages that we have. And I think of it just thinking about my son. I have I don't know how old he is now, 22-year-old son. And, you know, I've never had to sit down and have a talk with him about what to do if you get pulled over, because frankly, he's never been pulled over. And so there's so many things that we don't even think about as white people that are, you know, unearned advantages, or maybe it's, you know, something we don't have to deal with because our skin is white. And so much of that is baked into the system. And that's why, you know, when we talked about racism, it's really been an evolution for me, because to me, it's about how do we address these systemic issues that not only give privilege to white people, but they disadvantage Black people. And it's a combination of both. And I don't think we see both sides of it. We don't often even appreciate the privilege we have, but we certainly don't appreciate what it would be like to not have that and maybe actually be disadvantaged in some significant way just because of the color of our skin. So it's real.
When my son was about 12 years old, we lived in we lived predominantly white neighborhood. And I sat him down and I told him early, I said, listen, you cannot do what your friends are doing. And he didn't believe me. Matter of fact, he thought I was just crazy. And one day they were out shoplifting, him and his friend, the neighbor across the street. The neighbor's kid was sent home. We had to pick my son up at the police station. That's what I'm talking about, an unearned advantage. And it was the neighbor's kid who was taking stuff. But my son was kept at the police station. We were called there from there, and the neighbor's son was sent home. That's that unearned advantage. You're perceived as innocent, even though you're guilty. Yet I'm perceived guilty, even when I'm innocent. So you have that unearned advantage. So a cop has stopped me, has frisked me, and my son, I got to have that conversation with him, just because he's walking while Black or looking Black, which is something that any African-American child has had to hear that conversation, male and female.
Well, thank you. We wanted to set this stage, and I know that, I know at least for me, both of them spoke to some things that triggered some emotional pieces for me. And so what we ask is, going back to, you know, our community agreements is show up and be present. It's okay to honor that space, what we're asking is that if and when you honor that space, you make the connection to the historical content that we provided, so that we can move the conversation forward and we can go deeper in our own understanding. And you know, as stated earlier, we have, or I don't know if we stated, we have 3 questions that we will review. Each group will start with a question, and if time allots, we will go through the other questions. In the small group, we'll ask for one person to share out. When we share out in a larger group, we're asking to stick to a 2-minute share out and honor that time for everyone. So I will be the timekeeper when we do a share out. So I will graciously interrupt you if you, what I call in my sessions, air hustle, you know, taking a little bit longer than the 2 minutes, just because it's important that we honor each other's time and voice. So I think at this point, Hannah will transition us into the small group sessions.
Yeah.
Thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for engaging in the conversation and the questions. I know for our group, we stayed on question 1 and we just really unpacked that. And I felt like had a very robust conversation, and I had my own new learning. So what we're going to do now is transition into the share out. And like I said, we're going to ask that when you share out, you share just about 2 minutes of what you guys spoke to. I will be a stickler for time, just because honoring someone's time is something I value myself, to be honest. And so I want to make that commitment to you that I'll stay to that. So I will just let you know if you're a little over or if we need to wrap it up. So what I'd like to do is just all the group ones, we'd ask you to share out. If someone in the group 1 has shared out something, like let's say I share out from group 1, what I'll ask for the next person is if you have anything additional to add. You don't need to really restate what the other group shared if it's similar, but just add on, and that will help move the conversation as well. So we can start with question 1. So if anyone do the question 1, we have a taker. All right, Scott, you want to go first?
Is that the one about the subtler forms of racism?
That's the one, yep.
So in our group, we talked about the sundown towns not being in the South, being up north as a subtler form. It wasn't always written out. It was just sometimes an understood sundown towns and what that meant to everyone. We talked about whether what is subtle to some people is not subtle to other people. We talked about the subtler forms of racism in advertising, and how even though Aunt Jemima no longer appears with a red and white checked bandana, it's still the name Jemima. It's Uncle Ben. Anyway, it has, while it has changed, it's still more subtle, but it certainly exists in advertising. And then we also talked about local history. We talked about Rocky Springs and the carousel that they had there, and about trying to get that redone so it looked nice. They were going to put it in its own museum. And then some local groups came forward and just said that would be a good learning experience to talk about how Rocky Springs was a wonderful place, as long as you were white. And if you weren't, you couldn't go there. You couldn't enjoy any of that. And since that moment, nobody could recollect hearing about Rocky Springs and that carousel anymore. I'm not, excuse me, sure if it's so tainted their desire to get that carousel redone, but I haven't heard anything more about that anymore. Was that everything for the subtler one, or did we go into the Confederate statutes next?
We went into Confederate statutes next. We start speaking of that.
I should start speaking of that now. Okay.
Yeah, 30
We
seconds.
talked about okay, changing the dynamic with the Confederate women and the Civil War, making it states' rights and the Southern way of life, not about slavery. That's a very subtle turn. The Southern kind of gambit was that the North would take the hook on that, and they certainly did, even to this day. You can't just put it all on the South. The North paid a huge part in that and continues to this day. It's easy to just blame it on south of the Mason-Dixon line, but that wouldn't be accurate or correct.
Thank you. Someone else who unpacked question 1, another group? I believe there was 2 other groups.
I'm actually the reporter for my group 1. And I know I'm going to miss things. But when we talk about this North, the South, and guiltier than either one, it's not really a question of is one part of the country guiltier. It's pervasive. Everyone's as guilty. It might look or sound different in one place than another, but it's still racism, and it's still prevalent no matter where you are or where you're from. And we just talked a little bit about the podcast notion about how northern whites think of southern whites. We only touched on that a little bit, but I didn't add, except there was some conversation around definitely they should come down because they're I know my internet connection is not good right now. They're a symbol of supremacy and trying to keep people in what they consider to be their place, and just of an ugly time. But the question that kind of came up in our group was ugly history. So should they be in a museum as part of, this is part of what was wrong, I guess, is where we went with that. And I know I'm missing a lot of stuff, but that's mostly what our conversation was about.
Thank you, Becky. Rick?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Mary?
We had number one, yeah. Trying to add on just a little bit. We did agree that there seemed to be an attitude among Northerners that they were not as much a part of the problem. Though, as we know, cotton was a big industry, and it was really a national industry. It wasn't just in the South. The North depended on it. Someone pointed out that the banks were very much involved in all of that. The factories of the North depended on the cotton. And in order to have the cotton industry writ large, you had to have labor, and that's what the slaves provided, free labor. So someone pointed out there had been a discussion about a contract, which you didn't sign on to, but you were born into it. Then another point made was about the status of the statues, the questions of the statues, and that it was a very decisive, it's been a divisive thing to have statues present, and that I pointed out the question, the vocabulary microaggressions, so I only had learned recently, so that if you happen to have been a person who has been downtrodden in some way because of these people that are memorialized in statues, then you consider you are having a microaggression every time you go past that statue. I mean, that's just on a tiny scale. Also, it was pointed out that it might be good, for instance, I mentioned that the General Sutter in Lidditz is supposed to be talking about a new name for the restaurant, for the inn. It hasn't been done yet because the sign is still up. But maybe if they change it, they might want to establish some kind of a museum, which could be done in many towns, where these things could be moved and more material could be presented, so that we can fill in a lot of history that most of us have never had in our lives and in our education. Because we all commented that the material that we listened to and read contained a lot of new information. And finally, there might be a place in our country for something that South Africa has already gone through, which is truth and reconciliation.
Thank you. Thank you. Question 2, report out.
We still have question 1.
We still have question 1. There was a fourth one. I apologize.
I think they were from the same group. Pam, do you want to?
Sure. Yep. We discussed a little bit about how different parts of the country, you know, the North sort of looks down on the South, and it is there was a member of our group who remembers a trip taken to Florida when he was a child, and saw bathrooms for whites only and drinking fountains for whites only and blacks. and we talked about how it seemed more blatant in the South, but the North and South had different styles of racism. And we also, I like this one part of one member of our group said that the Confederate statutes, yes, they are a form of racism. It's just like a Nazi flag. It's a symbol, and you can tell the same emotion about that when you think of the statutes as a flag for a symbol for racism. I guess that's what I have for question 1.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Question 2.
We had question 2. Sheila, Jay, and I. It was explain why you agree or disagree with the scientific conclusion that there are differences between races. Are there benefits for white people in creating scientific reasons for white superiority? So what we discussed is how that racist policies came first and that they needed to be justified. So it was amazing to us that science, you think of science and you think that it's a hard and fast rule, but with these scientists, their findings were subjective. Like when they were saying that a certain skull was more beautiful, and like what does that mean? Like how that's just subjective. That's not real science. And that biases were leading them to certain conclusions. So again, you think of science as hard and fast, but their biases, they were trying to prove their biases with scientific findings. And then we went into the discussion about health issues and how one of the speakers was challenged, saying, so the other thing that kind of amazed us is that it was President Clinton talking, saying that there is proof that we are all genetically the same. And it just amazed us that it was when President Clinton was speaking. How did we not know this? You know, like, how are we just proving that we're all genetically the same? And how one speaker was challenged by someone saying, well, what about sickle cell anemia? And it's like how it's just so hard for people to realize that it's probably, well, it is economical and environment causing these illnesses, not biology. Let's see.
Your time is up.
Okay.
So hopefully another group will pick up. We'll pick up.
Now, can I just give one correction about the sickle cell? It affects Jewish people too, as greatly as it affects African Americans and others. So it affects other groups besides just Black folk.
Thank you, Rev. Another group too?
Oh, I'll go. So we also talked about the scientists that were enmeshed in their own cultures and bringing their own biases and assumptions to, and their own specific questions that they wanted to clearly answer in certain ways and bring their own subjective ideas into the science. And we also talked a little bit about kind of the importance of like the morally justify through this objective science kind of this status and variety of schemes for privileging some and discriminating against others. And we also talked about we're all essentially all the same. The actual difference in genetic makeup is 0.00 some percent between individuals. I think that's pretty much what I had.
Thank you, Greg. Was there another group too? Okay, then we'll transition into, I think there was a group 1 who should have did a group question 2. That I was a math teacher, so that 4 to 2 throws me off.
But it looks like Reverend Bailey's group, Dwight's group, and Sheila's group all were number 2. So I'm not sure out of those who maybe didn't, if one of those wants to share.
Yeah,
We'll offer grace, though. We'll offer grace.
I thought our group was to deal with group question 3.
All right. Oh, okay. Grace. All right. Question 3.
I was a part of a group that did question 3, comparing the YouTube video with the lost cause. And we talked about how the intensity of emotions were the same with the people in the YouTube video and the people that defend the lost cause. Also, the attitudes are the same. We also talked about the false narrative that's being written and rewriting history, and also how the South is glorified in the lost cause. And on the website of the town where the video was shot, people got upset about the way the town was portrayed, and the mayor was saying that that's not how the town really is, even though we see so many people in the video with those attitudes. So that's kind of the same as the lost cause, that false narrative and defending.
Thank you. Another group 3, Cheryl?
Yes, oh, is somebody going?
Mary, I believe you're going.
Okay. So we had that same video, and we were saying other questions were about, is it ethical? No, it's not ethical. Is it unfair? Yes, it's unfair. And in the video, they almost portrayed the person holding the sign as a traitor to their own identity, which is division, obviously, versus unification. I'm trying to think. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in if there were other things I'm missing.
Anyone from my group?
Yeah, what about the moral superiority? That was part of the question as well.
Okay.
And that was part of the ethical dilemma, that the South felt more morally superior, even though they lost the war. And they felt morally superior because they were Christians, according to Reverend Bailey, or that was part of it. That they had the right answers, even though they were.
Thank you. Another group 3.
We we looked at that sense of moral superiority, and how that they taught Christianity. They knew what was best, and they inflicted those ideas of what was best. The noble cause, that the South was crushed by an evil North, and there was a retelling of history. And then that part of the question that's about, it's an ethical dilemma, was that people who believed so deeply in that began with a basic assumption of white superiority and Black inferiority, that for them it was ethical because it was within that whole system that they had developed, and it was taking a step back that the system itself was unethical, not, and included all of those individual acts. We talked about many of those symbols from the antebellum South. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. I believe then there's one more group that answered this question. Like to share?
Right, I'm Ken. Yeah, the town in the video embodies the values that the Lost Cause was trying to promote, and the white superiority, and it was incorporated into so many parts of life, as one of the other groups indicated. I mean, it was incorporated into entertainment, music, comics, product advertising. Moral superiority was so that it became a part of, well, the implicit biases is a term that's thrown around a lot. Reverend Bailey referred to the shark and the water. Well, implicit bias is part of the water. And when we have these biases, we all lose because it causes everybody to be afraid of each other.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for sharing out your learning and just what the discussion was. At this point, I believe I'm passing it over to Lynn. You have the stage.
Thank you, Danielle. I was asked by our committee to make a few concluding comments. And I think what I would like to do, because our time is it basically has slipped away from us, I want to give you a couple of quotations as a way to conclude. And I want to represent question number 4. What gives you hope? We didn't assign a group to that question, but I assume that the reason you're here is that you've got a deep desire to see things change, and you have hope for a better day for us going forward. And you know, the Bible speaks about hope as being faith. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we don't see. And even though we're in the midst of a great deal of conflict and tension in the country right now, and it seems that we're in an intractable, racially conflicted society, I want to just throw out some quotes to give you some hope. Here's the one I really love from Nelson Mandela. To be an effective agent for peace, you have to seek not only to change the community and the world, what's more difficult is to change yourself before you seek to change others. And my organization has been through a process this past year, actually it goes back a couple of years, working on some of these same issues. And what I'd like to try to do is share my screen and let you see what I'm looking at. I want to read this to you. Well, that didn't work. There it goes. Can you see that? Listen, just listen. Can anybody see that?
No, did you press the green share and it should pop up a screen and you pick which screen you want to share?
Yeah, I did press that.
Can somebody make him a co-host? I think you have to do that for his screen share to work.
No, he has it already.
Can you see that? Nobody can see it?
That's okay. Just read it to us.
Yeah, you can read it to us.
All right, all right. Sorry, I've lost everybody now, except Danielle. We should have actually run through this. Listen, just listen. Everywhere there are Black and brown voices mourning, protesting, advocating, entreating, elucidating, venting. Listen to them. And when you're inclined towards disbelief, suspend it. Open your ears and your eyes and close your mouth. Rather than objecting or correcting or judging or condemning, listen. Never tell people of color how to cope with injustice. Never police our pain. Embrace every opportunity to learn. Do the work, click the links, read the writings, watch the clips. Don't avert your eyes from the realities with which we have no choice but to live. Let yourself be uncomfortable. Perceive that the blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. Written by an anonymous person. Well, let me close with somebody that I think can point us in an encouraging way. I believe that this quote I just gave you reflects the kind of spirit that you have all reflected in this process together. I think you're all here to listen, but I'd like you to listen to Barack Obama. He says, hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty, the audacity of hope. In the end, that is God's greatest gift to us, a belief in things not seen, a belief that there are better days ahead. The best way to not feel hopeless is to get up and do something. Don't wait for good things to happen to you. If you go out and make some good things happen, you will fill the world with hope and you will fill yourself with hope. And so my concluding comment about hope is get up and do something with all that you've been reading and all that we've been discussing together. Don't let it just sit there and percolate, but get up and do something. Thank you.
Well, Lynn, I think it was better you reading it than us seeing it anyway, personally. I appreciated listening to you myself. So I will turn it over to Dwight to close us out.
All right, thanks Danielle. Thanks to all of you for joining and taking an hour and a half of your evening, and also for being well prepared for the discussion. I know that's really important for the success of the small group to have spent some time with the material. Thank you for being on this journey with us. We've been at it now, what, Reverend Bailey, over 18 months, I think. And it's something we want to keep working at, and we want you to join us as you can.
And Dwight, I would also suggest that we want to ask you to also invite other folk to this. And the main thing is, even if you don't invite folk, what I've been doing is sending them the information so they can at least read it and listen to the podcast. And that would be a big blessing for us if you would just share the message and share the word.
Don't forget about the upcoming large group presentation. We're going to talk about voting. There's a lot going on right now, and it's good to be engaged. It's good to understand our history. And with that, I just want to thank all of you and hope have a good rest of your evening. And hopefully we'll see you back in October. See you, everyone.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You did a good job tonight handling us.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay. Enjoyed being
All
in
right.
the group, Reverend Bailey.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going
Thanks.
to shut this down.
Thanks, Hannah. Good
Thank
job.
you.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye.
Hey, Kathleen.
Pastor
Thank
Danielle.
you.
All right.
God bless.